Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Should be a great late night conversation. It is Saturday. Tomorrow is Sunday. The day before yesterday was Friday. And we are going to jump right into having a great show tonight.
The American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Hit the like button. Excuse me, spring allergies. There you go. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Always a pleasure to talk with all of you. We got plenty of things going on here, plenty of things we can talk about. And the way we generally do things on this YouTube channel, on the live streams, is I give my opening remarks. And while I give the opening remarks, I am writing down people's super chat questions. And then my opening remarks are followed by a roll call, where I call people out as I see them, names and locations. And then after the roll call, I start answering super chat questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our program, all you got to do is shoot me a super chat and I will discuss it in the second half of the show. I will be writing it down, and that's the second half of our show is all just me answering super chat questions. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and I guess we'll just start talking about things. Sometimes it's important to remind people of things that may be obvious to some of us, may be considered common sense by some, but are so obscured by mainstream U.S. media that they bear repeating again and again and again. One of those things is that Joe Biden clearly blew up the Nordstream 2 pipeline. All the evidence points to that. Prior to the Nordstream 2 pipeline being blown up, the White House said on many occasions that if Russia were to intervene in Ukraine, they would destroy the Nordstream 2 pipeline. Then on top of that, after the Nordstream 2 pipeline was destroyed, there were all kinds of efforts, gestures thanking the United States for doing so. Now Seymour Hersh has come forward with the details about how it was blown up. It's pretty clear the United States, under the direction of Joe Biden, destroyed the Nordstream 2 pipeline. And there was no investigation by the Biden administration into why or how the Nordstream 2 pipeline was destroyed. And we know why there was no investigation. It's because Biden already knows why the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was destroyed, because Joe Biden is the Nord Stream bomber, because the United States, under the direction of President Joe Biden, destroyed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Seymour Hersh is out there with his facts, with the information that's been provided to him, and the other versions of events, with the pro-Ukrainian group version that the New York Times came up with, or the version where they blamed it on Russia immediately, which made no sense because Russia would benefit in no way from the destruction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. All the other versions of events have basically been ripped to shreds. The version of events that stands is the version of events that Joe Biden destroyed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Russia has worked very, very hard to construct the Nordstream pipeline in order to export more natural gas to Europe. And the United States, under the leadership of both Trump and now Biden, has worked very, very hard to prevent Russia from getting in on the European natural gas markets. And now it appears that the Seymour Hersh version of events, in which the United States blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, is pretty indisputable. The United States destroyed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Joe Biden destroyed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. These are facts. There's no getting around this. It happened. Right? If you think that Joe Biden didn't destroy the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, you have a huge burden of proof on your shoulders, because all the evidence points to Joe Biden and the United States being the perpetrator. All the other versions of events have been pretty well debunked and don't stand up to facts. Joe Biden destroyed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And it's worth just reviewing that and reiterating to people that this was an act of terrorism. This was a huge piece of infrastructure, a natural gas pipeline. The environmental damage caused by it was massive. This was essentially an attack on Germany, a member of NATO, an EU country, a sovereign country, had its infrastructure destroyed by the United States in order to weaken their ability to do business with Russia. This is a pretty big deal. And mainstream US media has just moved on, said don't dwell on it, not a big deal. It's a pretty darn big deal. And so on here, thought I might start out the stream by just talking about what is obvious to us, but is not obvious to other people, what is obscured by mainstream media. People outside of our anti-imperialist bubble still live in this delusion where the United States may not have blown up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, where Russia may have blown up their own pipeline, where a pro-Ukrainian group, there's this, the other versions of events are just downright silly. Everybody knows that Seymour Hersh is right and that the United States blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Everybody knows that. And it's our job to make sure that we make people aware of that. Make people aware of the facts. Don't let it pass. Don't let people change the conversation. Don't let people forget this. That's one thing I just wanted to get out there tonight. Another thing I wanted to get out there tonight, just thought it might be relevant to our conversation. If you got any super chats for the second half of the show, by all means, send them my way. Why did Russia intervene in Ukraine? This is an important question as well. Why did Russia move its forces in? Why? How did all of this happen? Now, if you watch these streams, you will know about that. But the reason there's now a conflict going on between Russia and Ukraine, there's a war taking place, the reason is because of this. This is the Alley of Angels. This is a monument to all the children who have been killed in the past 8 years of bombing and shelling of Donbass, of the Donbass region. In 2014, the United States toppled the elected government of Ukraine. Viktor Yanukovych, the elected leader of Ukraine, was toppled. And they installed a virulently anti-Russian government in Kiev. A fanatically anti-Russian government took power. And that fanatically Russian government outlawed the teaching of the Russian language, started tearing down World War II memorials, did some pretty vicious things. So the people in Donetsk and Lugansk declared independence from Ukraine, and they established the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic. Those governments wanted to break away. And at that time, they asked Russia to recognize them, and Russia said no. Russia said, no, we're not going to recognize the independent governments. Instead, Russia facilitated the Minsk Agreement. And 8 years ago, the Ukrainian government signed the Minsk Accords and was supposed to start reintegrating the Donetsk and Lugansk regions back into Ukraine. It was supposed to grant them federal autonomy. They could do things their own way in their own local region. And they made that agreement, but they didn't do it. Instead, they've been bombing and shelling the people of these eastern regions. And for 8 years straight, they've been bombing and shelling Donetsk and Lugansk. The Donbass region has faced 8 years of food blockades, bombing, shelling, death squads, extremist groups operating. 8 years of bombing and killing. 15,000 people killed in Donetsk and Lugansk until finally the Russian government did as these people had asked and recognized them as independent countries and moved its military in to protect them. The US-backed government in Kiev has been killing the people of eastern Ukraine for 8 years straight. And this monument, the Alley of Angels, is a monument to the children under the age of 12 who have died at the hands of the US-backed regime. For 8 years straight, the US-backed NATO government has been slaughtering people in East Ukraine. And Russia has been trying to stop it with the Minsk agreements, with other diplomatic measures. They tried for 8 years to prevent the killing of these children, to prevent the killing of the people in the eastern regions. For 8 years, 8 relentless years, and it didn't work. And the United States and Zelensky and NATO did nothing to stop the killing of the people in the Russian-speaking eastern regions of Ukraine. And so Russia was forced to move its forces in. And this monument, the Alley of Angels, commemorates all the innocent people that show that no, Russia didn't start this. No, Russia isn't doing this as a war of conquest. Russia held off doing this for 8 entire years. For 8 years, Russia held off its intervention in Ukraine. For 8 entire years, it held off its intervention. And then when it became clear that the Biden administration was going to facilitate an offensive to just slaughter these people even more viciously, at that point, Russia felt it had no choice. And Russia moved its forces in. And Russia's special military operation, its denazification effort in Ukraine, is a response to the denial of these people's basic humanity, the denial of these people's human rights. The people of Donetsk, the people of Lugansk, they have been facing murder and killing and bombing and shelling for 8 straight years. And Russia moved in to protect them. Russia is not the aggressor. The United States and its proxy government in Kiev that's been killing these people for 8 straight years is the aggressor. Now, these are things that those of us who watch these streams are pretty well aware of. We know this, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't know these things. So it's important for us to get on here and remind our audiences of this, just like they don't know that Biden blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Well, Biden did blow up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and the Kiev government killed people in Donbass for 8 years straight, 15,000 dead, millions of refugees absorbed by Russia. And as a result, Russia was forced to move its forces in. These are important facts that people in the United States just don't have. Average Americans are not presented with this information, and their understanding of politics is limited by the fact that they do not know this information. So it is our responsibility, those of us who do know this information, to make it aware to the public. As UC says, they were lining up to storm Donetsk prior to Russia stepping in, as they had dammed off the natural water supply to Crimea. Russia was moving in to protect a group of people that had faced 8 years of bombing, 8 years of food blockades, 8 years of suppression of their language, 8 years of not recognizing the governments they have chosen, 8 years of not implementing the peace agreement that Russia facilitated to prevent the war. There are many, many, many examples. This version of events where this war in Ukraine is somehow an example of Russian aggression, this version of events that we hear in the United States is malarkey. It's bullshit. It's not true. Russia did not want to do this. Russia did everything in its power to avoid moving into Ukraine, but they had no choice. And when it was made clear that they had no choice, Russia moved in. Now, these are all important facts. They're facts that we have to work hard to get out there. But the fact and the reality that they're not out there is related to another topic that I think is worth discussing. Because in this book, in my recent book, Where is America Going?, which has gotten many good reviews, which I put together, it's an important work I put together. I talk about how the economic crisis that we are facing in the United States is a result of the computer revolution. I talk about how it is really because of the fact that computer technology has sped forward the productive capacity of mankind, that millions of workers have been eliminated from the assembly line because of the fact that the role of the worker in production is reduced. This has created a long-term economic crisis. And this is a built-in problem of capitalism, the problem of overproduction, the tendency of the falling rate of profit, that great technological leaps in capitalism tend to involve, at the same time, a long-term economic crisis, poverty created by abundance, poverty amid plenty. However, one thing that we need to acknowledge about the computer revolution is that the computer revolution is not a result of the free market. The computer revolution is not a result of capitalist hard work and innovation paying off. That's not the situation at all. The computer revolution, and the fact that we have artificial intelligence now, the fact that we have iPhones and iPads, the fact that we have so many dramatic breakthroughs, 3D printers, etc., all of this is a result of state intervention. If you ever want to know something, you ever want to go see a Hollywood movie that touches on the history of the computer revolution, go see The Imitation Game. It's a movie about Alan Turing. Alan Turing is the mathematician and philosopher in Britain who's largely credited with being the father of the computer revolution. And what happened was during the Second World War, when there was intense military control over almost every aspect of British society, Alan Turing, this well-known mathematician, was tapped by the British military to design a decoding machine. And he designed a very elaborate decoding machine that was largely the first computer, the first major computer system. And it was not the free market that got him to do it. And if it had been up to the free market, it never would have happened. It was state intervention for military purposes that caused the British government to find an obscure mathematics professor and give him funding and research to develop a computing machine, a decoding machine. And Alan Turing's decoding machine gave birth to a new level of machinery. It was a thinking machine, as they called it. And after the Second World War, in both the United States and in the Soviet Union, there was all kinds of investigation into computers. What can we do with computers? How can computer technology advance? And that was a big theme. You watched science fiction movies from the 1960s. You know, people were talking about, what does this mean? A thinking machine. What does all of this mean? But it was really as a result of a decision made by the U.S. intelligence community. Again, not the private sector, but the U.S. deep state, that we have the computer revolution panning out the way it panned out to this day. It's worth pointing out, it's rather important to point out, that after the U.S. was defeated in Vietnam, there was a significant shift in U.S. foreign policy. I often have divided the early Cold War and the late Cold War because there is a distinct difference in how the United States operated around the world. The turning point was Vietnam. But coming out of the Second World War, the United States fought communism with big, dramatic military confrontations. The Korean War was a horrendous, massive, devastating war, mass bombing. And it was largely the techniques that the United States had used to defeat Japan and Germany during World War II, mass bombing, firebombing, etc. It was those techniques being used on a massive scale to defeat communism. And the Korean War was a horrendous war. And the Vietnam War was a similar thing. Mass bombing, sending in of troops, lots of troops sent in, lots of bombing, lots of death. A lot of money was made. It was a huge money maker for weapons manufacturers, and the U.S. economy was somewhat dependent on weapons manufacturers coming out of the Second World War. What you can call the military-industrial complex was a mechanism for stabilizing the U.S. economy, a way of dealing with the problem of overproduction. Was that you have the government just spend huge, huge amounts of money on bombs and weapons, and the money keeps flowing in. I'm writing it down. If anyone has any more super chats, feel free to send them. And the early Cold War was also defined by McCarthyism in the United States. Witch hunts, bans on the Communist Party leaders thrown in prison, communist books and literature outlawed. You know, McCarthyism was a particularly authoritarian military way of running the United States. But the war in Vietnam, it didn't go so well for the United States. And the United States increasingly lost support from its allies. Many countries that usually supported the United States didn't support the Vietnam War. Many of The young Americans did not want to fight in Vietnam. They burned their draft cards. There were protests on college campuses. The Vietnamese National Liberation Front became very popular. Many people around the world sympathized with the Vietnamese fighting the mighty U.S. empire. And ultimately, the United States was forced to withdraw from Vietnam. And there was a domestic political crisis in the United States. The civil rights movement had escalated into the Black Liberation Movement. 1968, after the death of Martin Luther King Jr., almost every major U.S. city went up in flames with Black people rebelling against the American government. The National Guard was sent out to fight Black people. You had college students rioting and taking over their buildings, taking over campuses, and etc. And it was in that context that a very important book was published, which I quote in my new book. The head of the Center for Communist Studies at Columbia University in New York City, here in New York City at Columbia University in Harlem, there's an Ivy League school, and there's a building that used to be called the Center for Communist Studies. Now, it has another name now. I forget. It's like the International Studies School or something like that. It's the same institution. It has a different name. But it was called the Center for Communist Studies. And the head of it was a Polish-born Canadian named Zbigniew Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski was one of the main academics who studied communism. And he did it because he had an ethnic hostility to Russians. His family were Roman Catholics from Poland, and from the time he was a small child, he'd been raised to hate Russians. Russians were no good. Russians were Orthodox. They weren't real Christians. The Russians and the Poles were enemies historically, blah, 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 blah. And he had spent his entire life studying Russia, studying the Soviet Union, studying communism, and he had moved up the ranks of American academia to be the top strategist in communist studies and opposing communism. And Zbigniew Brzezinski published a book, 1970, called Between Two Eras, America Enters the Technotronic Age. And that word technotronic, that's a strange word. You can Google that word. It's not a word you hear much anymore. Technotronic. What does technotronic mean? What does it mean? Technotronic, relating to computers and communication technologies as a means of transforming society. Between Two Ages, America enters America's role in the Technotronic era, published in 1970. Technotronic. And in his book, Brzezinski presented an argument. And he argued that the rise in resistance to the Vietnam War, and the young people not wanting to fight in the Vietnam War, and the rise of protests among African Americans in the United States was all a response to advances in technology. He argued that television and other breakthroughs, the ability of people to gain way more information than they used to have, made people increasingly dissatisfied with their circumstances in life because they were aware of what other people had. It also made people more willing to question what they were being told because they had access to information they would not normally have had access to. And in his book, he directly linked rebellions in the colonized countries of the world, in Africa and elsewhere, and the wave of anti-colonial uprisings that happened in the aftermath of the Second World War to the increasing accessibility of information and education. He said the making of a communist revolutionary, he says the making of a Che Guevara or a Tomas Sankara, the making of a revolutionary is a frustrated, educated person, a frustrated intellectual. When people in formerly colonized countries are given education, however, they see the problems that their country have, they become increasingly frustrated, and that inspires them to become communist revolutionaries. And he argued the same thing was happening among Black Americans, that since World War II, a new layer of African Americans had gotten access to education, but they also saw how horrendously treated their people were and that they were frustrated intellectuals. And that he then extrapolated this to argue that that's what the new left was in general. There was a new wave of access to information among the American public. There was a new wave of access to information globally among people, and that when people have more information, and they have more information, that makes them less willing to accept what they're being told, and it makes them more frustrated with their circumstances in life, makes them want to change it, want to do something. And that the culture around the world, and especially in the United States, was changing because of accessibility to information. That's what Brzezinski argued in his book, and that you could interpret the new left of the 1960s as accessibility to information. And he argued that rather than try and fight this wave of people getting angry and rising up because they have more access to information, rather than try and fight this, the United States could own it. And he argued that the United States could put itself at the center of an information revolution. And it could use the means of information and the results of people getting that information, the uprisings, the rebellions, the dissatisfaction that results from people getting this information, that could be utilized to destroy the Soviet Union and the enemies of the United States, and it could be utilized to Americanize the world. That's the language that he used. And so Brzezinski basically lays out in this book that the computer revolution, the Technotronic era, as he sees it, will be vital in defeating the communists. And so it is essential for the American government to do everything it can to make sure that the United States is at the center of the computer revolution. And it is not a secret at all. You can Google these things. All of the major tech monopolies, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Twitter, Facebook, all of these companies came into existence with the direct oversight of American intelligence. The CIA, the NSA, the FBI, the Pentagon, military intelligence. There would be no Amazon. There would be no Amazon if it wasn't for the Pentagon. Google, Amazon, and the Pentagon. Amazon, Jeff Bezos. Amazon and Jeff Bezos and the Pentagon are like this. And the ultra monopoly that we have now with Amazon, Amazon has no competitors. No one comes anywhere close to Amazon, is a result of the government facilitating the rise of Amazon. And the same goes for Google. And the same goes for Twitter. Same goes for Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. The same goes for Microsoft and Bill Gates. The computer revolution happened as the result not of the free market, but of the government, the state, the deep state, under the direction of people like Zbigniew Brzezinski, realizing that if they could sit at the center of the global apparatus of information control, they could use that power to defeat communism. And they very much openly stated that that was their intent. And in addition to piling huge amounts of funding and support into building the tech monopolies of Silicon Valley, they also made a treaty that it was illegal for there to be any exporting of high technology to the Eastern Bloc. They passed a treaty that basically said any high technology has to be blocked from the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, to its credit, even though it had nowhere near the resources that the United States had, it actually made some amazing breakthroughs in terms of computers. For example, the Soviet Union developed its own home computer system. There was a purely Soviet-made home computer system designed by the Soviet government in the early 1980s. They didn't have the resources to mass produce it. But with their own innovation, their own scientists, their own engineers, the Soviet Union was able to develop a home computer. And the Soviet Union, their scientists made great breakthroughs, and their scientists had great achievements in terms of computer technology. They just didn't have the resources to fund them. The Soviet Union was surrounded. It was constantly being threatened by nuclear annihilation. It was constantly having to spend more and more money on nuclear weapons in the arms race that was really an arms catch-up. Every time the Soviet Union had developed a new weapon to deter U.S. attack, the USA would develop an even bigger weapon. So then they would have to get another one and then another one. It was really an arms catch-up. Every time the Soviet Union was able to secure its existence from a U.S. first strike, the USA would then escalate the arms race, and the Soviet Union would have to catch up again. And it was an arms catch-up. It was the Soviet Union being threatened with nuclear annihilation by the United States and having to spend lots of its resources to keep up with efforts to be able to deter such an attack. And it was a huge strain on the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union just didn't have the resources to keep up in terms of the computer revolution. But yet they had great achievements. This idea that capitalism created computers, that's bullshit, right? I mean, there's a meme about the iPhone. Seen it many times. The iPhone is proof of how great capitalism is. Well, the first mobile phone ever patented was in 1957, patented by Leonid Kaprianovich in the Soviet Union. Second of all, if there's a GPS on your phone, a GPS uses satellites. What was the first satellite? Sputnik. Third, Huawei phones are way better than iPhones. They last longer, they've got better cameras, they've got more memory. And Huawei phones are made by a state-controlled mega corporation in China. So this idea that the computer revolution is a product of capitalism, is a product of the innovation of the free market, is utter nonsense. It's a product of heavy government intervention in the West. The Soviet Union, with their state-run economy, was able to have just as many great inventions with nowhere near the resources. And the tech companies, the tech monopolies that now dominate our economy were created by the government and depend on government sponsorship and oversight. So the idea that the computer revolution is proof of the greatness of capitalism, this is nonsense. But this points us to a bigger problem, a bigger question, because it is computers that have more or less rendered capitalism an outmoded economic system. The problem that the worker is never able to buy back the product he produces is greatly expounded by the computer revolution. This is a huge leap in technology, and it's creating a huge prolonged economic crisis. And the only way out of that crisis is for the working class and the broad masses of people to take control of the means of production. The banks, factories, and industries, the centers of economic power, need to be organized to serve public good and not the profits of a wealthy few. We need an economy that's organized to serve the people. And if you look around the world, there is an emerging alternative economy in Russia and in China and in Venezuela and Iran and Cuba and Nicaragua and other countries where they don't have this problem that we have in the West. The computer revolution is not making people poorer. People in China are not getting poorer because of computer technology. It is the opposite. And that is because China's economy is not centered around making profits for private corporations. Yes, there are many private corporations who do make profits. There's many private institutions, but the Communist Party and the state-run industries have dominance, and the economy is forced to work in the interest of the public despite market mechanisms existing. And so when we look at this situation, we have to understand why it is that Joe Biden blew up the Nordstream 2 pipeline. We have to understand why it is that the United States poured so many weapons into Kiev and wouldn't allow the Minsk agreement to be implemented and forced a situation where Russia had to move in to protect the people of Donbass. It's because their system is dying. The Western capitalist system cannot handle the computer revolution. The computer revolution points to the need for a rationally planned economy. Under capitalism, your only value is your ability to sell your labor power to a boss. You rent yourself out to a boss, he turns your labor power into profits, and the computer revolution creates a situation where workers, human labor, is far, far less in demand. But the ability of the capitalist to produce products is far greater than ever before. And this inevitably leads to a situation where there's all kinds of products that cannot be purchased, cannot be sold. The worker cannot buy back what he produces. And this problem of capitalism is exacerbated by the computer revolution. And the computer revolution lays the basis for building something alternative. And in countries where profits are not in command, they continue to have economic growth. Whereas in the United States, we're continuing to see our economy get weaker and weaker and weaker. So all of this is worth discussing. All of this is worth reiterating. And these are not simple concepts. The problem of overproduction, the problem of the tendency of the falling rate of profits, Bonapartism and the fights that result within the ruling class as a result of capitalist crisis, the rise of counter gangs, and the increasing role of revolutionary, political, religious, activist organizations as society deteriorates amid a capitalist crisis, and the basis for building an anti-monopoly coalition of bringing together different forces in the United States to oppose the big monopolies and their drive to save their system with war and a low-wage police state. All of these things are important to understand. We at the Center for Political Innovation have developed a very unique worldview. And this book, Where is America Going? The link is down below. This book will help you understand the way the world is moving and why things have gotten the way they are, why there's an escalation internationally, why our civil liberties are being taken away at home, why our living conditions are deteriorating, why China is rising, why socialism in the world has changed and has a market sector. You will understand all of this if you read this book. This book is here to give you that kind of understanding, but it's not just about giving you that understanding. History presents us with a challenge. One of the key aspects of growing up as a person is becoming aware of your own abilities, your own size, and your own strength. For example, a baby believes it is the most powerful thing in the world. A baby believes it has astronomical power because all a baby has to do to get what it wants is cry. The baby cries, it gets fed, it gets held, it gets taken care of, it gets its diaper changed. And when one is a baby, one thinks that they are the most powerful person in the world. They're the most powerful thing that exists. They have, a baby, an infant, has a view of its own strength that is very inaccurate. A baby is not the most powerful thing in the world, but the way the baby interacts with the world leads it to believe it is the most powerful, most effective, most influential thing. But as the baby gets older, it becomes aware of the fact that it really does not have any power. Right? Part of the transition from being a baby to a toddler is the toddler starting to realize how powerless they really are. The parents defeating the toddler, making the toddler aware of its own powerlessness, making the toddler submit to the parent's authority, right? These are things that people experience, and that often what makes people ineffective is that they don't have an accurate assessment of their own strengths. And most people collapse into a state of mind that almost feels like they can't do anything, almost feels like they can't have any influence, where they just kind of learn to go with the flow because they feel too powerless. They just feel like, nothing I can do will make a difference. Nothing I can say will make a difference. And they go through life with kind of a defeated mindset, assuming that the problems of the world, like the economy, like the danger of a new world war, like deteriorating living conditions, like the deterioration of our civil liberties, these are all things that you can't do anything about. However, you also get the other extreme. You see this a lot with young leftists, is that rather than feeling completely powerless, they have delusions of grandeur. They think that they will lead the revolution. They think they are Lenin. They are Che Guevara. They will storm the barricade. They think that they are the vanguard. They are all powerful, all influential, and they aren't. And that often the reason people will get involved in political activism very intensely for a year or 2 years is because they have a delusion of their own abilities. They believe that they are capable of doing so much. And then when they really get involved in the real struggle and they see how difficult it can be to get just basic things done, they become completely demoralized. when they see how hard it can be to get along with other people, when they see how difficult it can be to influence policy, when they see how difficult it can be to get people to understand what you're saying. People don't realize how difficult political organizing can be. Peter Coffin made a great documentary about our recent CPI conference. You can watch it because it shows you kind of the behind the scenes, all the work that goes into just staging a little conference in Washington, D.C. at a hotel. These things are not easy to do. They're not easy to do. And that often people who become politically active, they have a delusion about themselves and their own power. And when they see that that delusion doesn't match reality, they drop out of things. But part of what we are doing here, and part of the challenge of what we are doing here, is we don't want to have either delusion. We don't want people to think they're powerless. And we also don't want people to think they're all powerful. We want to give people an assessment of their own abilities and show people that they can take action to influence the course of history. We want people to have an accurate assessment of who they are and how they can intervene in history to make a difference. That is what we are striving to do. And we are building a community, the Center for Political Innovation, a group of people who have taken it upon ourselves to oppose the low-wage police state, to oppose the march toward World War III, and to try and make clear that it would be in the interests of the United States to become a socialist society, a society where the economy was organized to serve the people and not the profits of a wealthy few. It would be in our interests to have a society where the major centers of economic power were organized to serve the people. We put forward a 4-point plan of 4 dramatic economic reforms that would greatly improve the lives of the American people. And we have built conferences, seminars, workshops, protests, demonstrations, published books to try and awaken people, to get people to have a realistic assessment of their own abilities and their own strengths so that they can move forward and intervene in the historical process. That is what we aim to do with the Center for Political Innovation. And it is with the kind of understandings you'll get from this book, from these live streams, that you'll start to move toward an accurate understanding of yourself and an accurate understanding of how you can intervene. And when we do these live streams, when we do these broadcasts, when we have our conferences, when we have our events, when we publish books, that is what we are doing. We're trying to awaken people, and make them aware of their potential and ability to intervene, make them aware of why the world is the way it is and how they could make a difference. That's what we're doing. And if you want to be part of it, I really think you should. And there's plenty of things you can do. A number of people are joining the Center for Political Innovation. And it's very easy to join, to become a member. We have a website, and I will drop the link to join. You can sign up and become a dues-paying member today. We have a Zoom call every Saturday for all members nationally to jump on. And at the end of June, we're having a workshop in Missouri. We're having a weekend workshop, June 23rd, 24th, and 25th. And people are welcome to come. And don't just come, but bring a few friends, right? All members are invited. We're putting together the guest list. It's going to be great. It's going to be a great weekend workshop in Missouri. And there's going to be some other ways to intervene. For example, This weekend, like a week from today in New York City, there's going to be a religious gathering at the United Nations, the New York Peace March, nypeacemarch.com. This is a group of conservative religious pastors that are gathering to have a demonstration at the UN to mourn the losses of both sides in Ukraine. And on top of that, to call for reconciliation between the gangs in Haiti. Now, those of us who are anti-imperialist, those of us who are involved with the rage against the war machine, we feel like we would like to be part of this big gathering. If hundreds of Christians are going to gather in New York City at the United Nations to call for mourning both sides and the losses of life in Ukraine, and to bring a message of reconciliation, we ought to intervene. And so we are going to intervene. And we are building our own contingent of this demonstration. Right? Go to nypeacemarch.com. Well, the CPI and the Libertarian Party and a few other groups, we're going to be gathering in Union Square a couple hours before the demonstration. And we're going to be assembling our forces. And we're going to march up and join this demonstration. And we're going to raise awareness about the Uhuru movement and the charges that they are facing. We are going to raise awareness about the danger of a new world war. We're going to be respectful participants in this rally, but we're going to have our own rally beforehand in Union Square. We're going to then march up to the UN event. And it's going to be great. And this is our ability to intervene. We saw something was happening. It's not exactly the kind of thing that we would do, but it's the kind of thing that we support. We're not hostile to religious people. And we want peace and reconciliation. So we are having our own event, and we will then go and join this bigger event. This is the kind of thing. These are the kinds of things that we can do. All right. There was just a great meetup today in Portland, in the Pacific Northwest. Members of the Center for Political Innovation got together and discussed what they could do. Well, this is what we can do. This is our ability to intervene in the historical process, to take up the challenge of history and to assert our desire for a better world. It's our effort to do that. And these are the kind of things that the Center for Political Innovation is doing. We're looking in August or September to have another big conference with Scott Ritter and some other big names out in Portland on the West Coast. We have people all across the country who are joining our organization. We have meetups and workshops, book clubs and book classes, and we're gradually, bit by bit, building a group of people who have taken it upon themselves to engage in political innovation and not to do so in the traditional way. We are not part of the traditional left. The traditional left is dead. We are doing it. We are doing it. We are intervening differently. We are engaging in political innovation because the old methods that have been used by the old communist groups that have been around for so long, they're not working anymore. And that the future isn't going to be made by the small minority of people who consider themselves to be leftists. The future is going to be made by the broad masses of people. That is who will make history. And so we've taken it upon ourselves to intervene, to take up history's challenge and to intervene in the historical process. And that is what I'm challenging all of you to do. I'm challenging you to join the Center for Political Innovation. If you want to see what our group is about, watch Peter Coffin's great documentary and then join the Center for Political Innovation. I'm challenging you to join the organization. I'm challenging you to participate in our activities. I'm challenging you to make social media content of your own, to promote these ideas. I'm challenging you to tell your coworkers and your friends about who really blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and why Russia is intervening in Ukraine. I'm challenging you to insert yourself into history, to assert yourself onto history. I'm challenging you to not simply let the world happen to you. That's what I'm challenging you to do. And I hope that these broadcasts are inspiring. I hope that these broadcasts are empowering. I hope that you feel more alive and more awakened by my words. I hope you learn from what I have to say. And I hope that I can do my little part to bring you to a state of being more awake, more active, and more excited, more focused, more aware. That's what I hope that you can do. So on that note, folks, if you want to give me your name and location, I will call you all out as I see you. And from there, I will start answering super chat questions. So who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? We got Jose Gonzalez in Caracas, Venezuela. We got Lawrence Johnson. We got Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Jamie in St. Paul. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati. Rupert Fellows in England. Steve in Boston. Megan in Kansas City, Missouri. We got east of Pittsburgh. We got Colin in Greensboro. We got Vancouver, Canada. Isaac Cabrera. We got Heidi in Edinburgh, Scotland. We got Patch in Arizona. Lorton in Virginia, Bendigo, Australia. We got Laurie Spencer, the great radio host, recommending that if you want to learn more about CPI, watch Peter Coffin's excellent documentary. Watch it. You will like it. We got Deb in Mazatlan. We got Carl in Washington. We got John McCarthy in Chicago. We got Boris from Taipei. I'm close to Jarupa, says MJ. Limassol in Cyprus. Very, very good. St. George, Utah. Limassol in Cyprus. All right. Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Lori in Oklahoma. Zephyr in Oregon is with us. Welcome, 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 everybody. We're doing a great thing here. Micah in Las Vegas, Mariah in North Carolina, Bob Troy in New York. We got someone out in New Orleans. We've got a great crew of people here. Gribble is in Southern Oregon. We got a great group of people here, and we do great work. Pablo in Argentina, Ian Foster in Chester, England. We are very dedicated to carrying out our work. We got Phil in Miami. We got Waldorf in Oregon. We got David Fox in Australia. We're doing great work here. And we're trying to connect with people, trying to get things done. Nick in Tampa, Florida. And it's really an honor. It brings a new level of meaning to life in order to intervene and try to carry out these operations and try to change the course of history. It gives you a new level of spirituality and connection with God and with higher power to be able to work together. You know, I will say one thing, and then I'll start answering super chats. That part of the reason it was hard for me to rediscover my faith in God was because of something that's called the problem of evil. And this is a really common thing that many atheists will bring up. It's a very important point. If God is all powerful and God is all good, why does suffering exist. If God can do anything, right? He can do anything. He's all powerful. And if God is all good, meaning that he is purely 100% moral, why do people die of cancer? Why do children suffer from malnutrition? Why do horrendous things happen? Why is the world so full of pain and trauma? God can't be all good if he has the magical ability, if he is all powerful to stop all of this, then God can't be all good. Well, this has led me to the understanding that this notion that God is all powerful, this notion of God as a force that can do absolutely anything, that's actually not correct. God is the force of good in the universe. God is the spiritual power of truth and light and morality. But God is not all powerful. And if one looks throughout the history of most religions in the world, there's a recognition of this. There are verses in the Bible that allude to this. God is not all powerful. God is not this omnipotent force that can just, do anything at any point. Right? I would argue that God is the most powerful force in the universe. God is the source, the creation. But God is not all powerful. God is all good. And as we become more good, we become more connected to God. But God is not all powerful. And the way we've been taught to think about God in this very simplistic way, as this magical force that can just do anything, has in a way taken away from our ability to connect spiritually, because it is not realistic. Evil does exist in the world. People do suffer. As the West eats its own tail, how convinced are you that the U.S. always knew socialism was always the way? That's an important thing for me. Now, if your religious beliefs are different than mine, I can respect that. But ultimately, if you think of God as this all-powerful being that can just do anything, your ability to utilize spiritual power, to connect to higher forces in order to achieve good is going to be limited, because you're not going to have a realistic understanding. So there you go. I hope that was a little bit of a helpful bit of spiritual insight. Just wanted to throw that out there. But I am going to start answering super chat questions now. However, I just want to remind you all that, there's about 180 people watching right now. Usually there's between 1,000 and 2,000 people who watch these streams. But most of the people who watch these streams watch it afterwards. They watch it tomorrow, the next day. That's okay. People are welcome to watch it anytime. But those of you that are watching right now have a special privilege, because you are watching this live and you have the ability to influence. You have the ability to assert yourself into the course of this live stream. With your super chat, you can influence the conversation here. You can send me a super chat and get me to talk about whatever you want. You are very privileged in comparison to the other 80-90% of the people who watch these streams. The people who watch this afterwards have nowhere near the power you have. You can influence the ability of this conversation to go one way or another way. So I encourage you to use that ability. Do what Gleb just did and send me a super chat to influence the course of the conversation, because you're here, you're watching right now, and that gives you the ability to intervene in this conversation. Just like I'm telling you, you have the ability to intervene in history. If you're watching right now, you have the ability to make this conversation go the way you want. Gleb is asking me, do you believe in supernatural, transcendent forces of evil as well as good, Satan or the devil or evil spirits? There you go. There you go. So if there's something you want me to talk about here as we start answering super chat questions, send me a super chat and I will do my best to answer it. I respond to almost every super chat I get. Occasionally people just do silly troll things and I have to ignore them. That's rare. So there you go. There you go. First question, first super chat. With the liberation of a major city in Donbass, David asks, how long before the Ukraine will surrender? Well, at the end of the day, it's really up to the United States. Ukraine is not a sovereign country. Zelensky was elected on a platform of implementing the Minsk agreement and ending the conflict. And look, now he's presiding over the conflict. He was never allowed to do what he was elected to do. And at the end of the day, Ukraine is just a puppet, an outpost of NATO and Western imperialism. And it does not have the sovereignty to carry out military decisions on its own. And because of that, it depends on when the United States feels like it will put pressure on Ukraine or tell Ukraine, okay, we're going to call it off. Some of the revelations from McGregor about how 10,000 armored vehicles have been destroyed, 10,000. I mean, that can't be replaced. And that all the money that the United States wants to pour into Ukraine is not going to make a difference at this point. Ukraine is going to lose. They've already lost. And, the pouring of more weapon and the prolonging of this is only delaying the inevitable. But if the point is to just bleed out Russia financially, they may keep it going for as long as they possibly can. Darkness is the absence of light. Evil is the absence of good. Evil was not created. All right. Very good. All right. So next super chat question. Political parties are not in the U.S. Constitution, but they have a stranglehold on our government. I think that increasingly we need to view parties as irrelevant. That's what I think we need to do. The answer is to just say, I don't care if you're a Democrat. I don't care if you're a Republican. I don't care if you're an independent or what you call yourself, and start giving our backing to politicians based on what they offer and what they actually will do. And that, the parties create a partisanship where it's, are you on the blue team or are you on the red team? It shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter, and the parties kind of create this illusion that we have the influence, that there's two different ideologies. There's all kinds of different forces in the Republican Party right now. There's all kinds of different forces in the Democratic Party. I feel like Marjorie Taylor Greene and RFK probably have more in common with each other than they do with people in their respective parties. At the end of the day, there are people that are for the establishment. There are people that are against them. And increasingly, a lot of Americans have been trained to think about politics in terms of the good Democrats, the bad Republicans, the good Democrats. And that weakens you. It limits your ability to actually understand the real issues. And I would increasingly urge people to think of politics in a more independent way, independent of party affiliations. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you have an R or a D or any other letter next to your name. What matters is what you actually do. And we're on the brink of World War III, and we have Julian Assange being tortured, and we have a low-wage police state on the rise, and some people are against it and some people are for it. I'm with the people that are against it. And some of those people that are against it are in the Republican camp. Some of them are in the Democrat camp. Some of the independent camp. But I'm against it. And all of us who support Assange, and all of us who oppose World War III, and all of us who oppose tech censorship, and all of us that support the Uhuru movement as they face this horrendous indictment, all of us have to come together. And we have to just start seeing where people stand on the issues, not on terms of ideology, but in terms of the issues. We have to see that as the defining point, and we need to be with anyone who will stick up for Assange, anybody who will oppose more weapons to Ukraine, anyone who will oppose more escalation with China. That's who we need to be friends with. All right. Was the Arab Spring a color revolution? Yes, in a lot of ways it was. It was a controlled release. Jared Andrew Cohen was working with Hillary Clinton in the State Department to coordinate between the tech companies like Twitter and the U.S. State Department in order to control the unrest. There was a lot of spontaneous unrest in 2011. A lot of people in the Arab world were angry. They were unemployed. They were hungry. There was a lot of suffering. But it's very, very clear that Twitter and Facebook and the social media companies, in coordination with Al Jazeera and with the Hillary Clinton State Department, coordinated to make the color revolution, to make the events of the Arab Spring go the way they did. And that tends to be how color revolutions are, right? Is that, the reason they're color revolutions is because a color doesn't mean anything. It's just vague. It doesn't have any meaning, right? And that means that any force can project their own grievances, their own ideas onto it. The color revolution, it's a vague thing. It's against corruption. It's against, it's for democracy. Yeah, it's for freedom. It's always a vague thing and a color. And any group, usually all kinds of different political forces in the country, project their own grievances, their own feelings onto the uprising. And the uprising is simply staged in order to create an atmosphere for other forces to move in. The classic formula for a color revolution is you have a bunch of young people protesting, and it's not clear what they're protesting about. And then they provoke a situation where the police brutalize them. And then that gets a lot of publicity. And then more people come out because they're angry about the police brutalizing them. And that gets more publicity. And more people come out because they're angry about it. And more people in the government say they're with the protesters. And then a section of the military and the deep state that is aligned with the United States uses that as an opportunity to stage a coup. That's generally how color revolutions happen. It's kind of theater and performance. And the part of the way it works is you don't really know what it's about. It's about these people were protesting and they got brutalized. And what were they protesting about? Well, they wanted freedom. What's freedom? Well, they wanted democracy. What's democracy? The Tiananmen Square events of 1989 in China. What were they about? I don't know. Democracy. What is democracy? I don't know. There were neo-Maoists there. That was a big part of it. People who wanted to go back to the Mao years. There were also people in the Tiananmen Square events in 1989 who hated black people. That was a big thing. In the lead up to the 1989 protests, Nicholas Kristof wrote about how race riots were happening all over Chinese campuses and African students were being lynched. And there was this whole drive to get African students banned from China's college campuses. And many of the people protesting in Tiananmen Square were Chinese college students who were racist and didn't want black, Africans to be studying at their universities. And some of them were neo-Maoists. Well, what do neo-Maoists and racists have in common? Not much, but they were both there. And the Falun Gong was there, the religious group, and all kinds of different forces. And what was it about? It was about democracy. What is democracy? The word democracy is in the Chinese constitution like 42 times, right? Mao called the first stage of his revolution the new democratic revolution. So the idea that they wanted Western capitalism, no, they didn't want that. Some of them wanted banning black students. Some of them wanted to go back to the hardline Mao era. And, it was all over the place. And that's what makes it effective. And it's just, a group of people start protesting. It's not clear what it's about, but they provoke a situation where the police beat them up or arrest them or something like that. And then everyone else goes to protest because they're mad about the police beating them up and protesting. And then people within the government say that they're outraged about these people being treated badly. And then a section of the military storms into power and uses the coup, uses the protest as a pretext in order to bring the pro-US faction of the government into power. That's how color revolutions tend to happen. And it's really about the protests are just kind of made for TV. They are there to give a narrative to a military coup. They are there to confuse the population about why the military coup is happening. They're there to set the stage for the overthrow of the elected government, the overthrow of the existing government, by a section of the police and the military and the state that is armed and backed by the United States. And that's generally what color revolutions are. That's how color revolutions are carried out. And the Arab Spring protests were generally, they were like that. All right, next question. Right-wing conservatives cannot see that central planning is a success in China. How do we talk to them about it? Well, point out to them the large amount of government involvement in the economy in China, because it is a really common thing for people to say, well, China's just capitalist now. That's why it's having success. And you have to point out, okay, in China, they have this thing, they have 5-year economic plans. In China, they have a huge number of state-run banks and state-run enterprises. And in China, private companies are constantly being directed by the government and told what to do. The government runs China's economy. That's very, very clear. And you have to prove that to them, because many people have been led to believe that because there are billionaires in China, because there's private companies in China, it's just communist in name only. And you have to show them that that is not the case. You have to actually do the work of showing them, no, that's not the case. And I think that's the important thing. And you have to let them not get away with that, because I think most people just don't think about it. China's communist when it's bad, and China's capitalist when it's good. Anything good in China, oh, that's capitalism. That proves the market is the answer. Anything bad in China, well, that's communism. Don't let them get away with that. All right. I mean, I endlessly, I've seen, Turning Points USA and others. They have this thing about how, oh, capitalism is a great system because so many people have been lifted out of poverty. Well, the overwhelming majority of poverty alleviation in the past 50, 60 years has happened in China. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty in China. And they say, well, that's because it's capitalist. And then you say, oh, okay, so Obamacare is communism. The post office is communism. I don't know, income tax in America is communism. But China, where the government controls the economy with 5-year economic plans, huge state-run industries, you're telling me that's capitalism? It's a nonsensical way of thinking. People just don't have a realistic way of understanding these things. And you have to just make clear to them, look, if you think that communism doesn't work and you acknowledge that China is a vastly successful country, those thoughts don't go together. China's economic successes are very clearly the result of state central planning. You have to make that clear. All right. Do you think CPI will create school, college classes in the future? I love these streams. We got to come in Missouri, right? That's what we're doing. We have the model lectures that I gave. I gave 8 classes, the Saxton lectures. You can watch. There's a YouTube stream of them. There's a YouTube playlist. The Saxton lectures, right? And I made eight classes in 2 parts. There's the first part and the second part. I'll put the link here. The Saxton lectures, they're called. And it's a playlist that I put together, and these are like model classes, and we're training people to do their own version of the Saxton lectures, which are 8 classes. And if you watch these classes, you will learn everything there is to know about CPI and our world beliefs. You'll learn a lot about Marxism and communism. It's the Saxton lectures, and we are training other people in CPI to be able to give these classes. We want to be able to have weekend events where people will go and they'll learn what we're all about, and they'll join our organization. We want to have just like workshop educational weekends where people learn our ideology, learn our perspective. So we have the Saxton lectures, and we're training people in the group to be able to give these classes, to make them their own. And there'll be people, it won't be me, but there'll be people. I mean, I'll give a couple of them, but it'll be mainly other people giving the Saxton lectures. at our upcoming workshop in St. Louis, Missouri, near St. Louis, Missouri. And if you want to go, by all means, become a member of CPI. You got to be a member, and you can be invited, and you can join us, and we'll be giving the classes. It'll be kind of a weekend to get together, and we're trying to train to do these around the country. We want many people who maybe have never heard of us, don't know what we're about, to come to one of these weekend events and learn our ideology, learn our perspective, learn what our group is about. So, we do have such classes, and yes, we do want to train other people to be able to give them. So if you are interested in helping out with this, if you're interested in attending some of these classes, if you're interested in learning to eventually give some of these classes, please sign up and become a member of CPI so we can put you to work. Right? Because there's a lot of people that need to be educated. We have an organization to build. We must build the Center for Political Innovation. It must be built. There is an urgent necessity for an organization like ours to intervene in the historical process. We need you. So sign up, become a member, get involved. There you go. There you go. As the West eats its own tail, how convinced are you that the West knew socialism was the way all along? Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if they knew it was the way all along, but they recognized that capitalism as a system had deep problems, and they've been trying to manage those problems all along, and they're trying to hold off. And they've often had a dual belief about communism. Communism can't ever be effective. It's failed everywhere it's ever been tried, and it's a big menace that's about to take over. And it's like, well, if it's a big menace that's about to take over, it's not completely a failure, then, is it? And that there is a reluctant acknowledgement. I often tell people there's two types of media in the United States. There's the media that's meant for mass consumption, but then there's media that just has cold, raw facts in it. I often quote the CIA World Fact Book, because the CIA World Fact Book has economic data showing how people in socialist countries benefit from the socialist system. I quote the Library of Congress studies. The Library of Congress, the U.S. Library of Congress, has done studies of almost every country in the world. And those studies have a lot of data about how the communist governments have really improved people's lives. The hospitals that have been built, the efforts to curb illiteracy, to provide, they have a lot of data. And I quote those all the time. And that in the official sources of the American government, they have to acknowledge the real material achievements. Communism's not better because, it's revolutionary or something. Communism is better because it provides schools and jobs and healthcare. It expands the life expectancy. It expands access to medical care. It decreases the infant mortality rate. It expands the life expectancy. It increases overwhelmingly the rate of literacy. It electrifies countries. Communism's achievements are very material and measurable. The Soviet Union, under the leadership of the Soviet Communist Party and Stalin, became an industrial superpower, invented space travel, wiped out illiteracy. The achievements are there. And, that's what you have to point out to people. And that it's very hard to deny those achievements. And we can acknowledge the shortcomings too. Right? I always tell people that, that at the end of the day, we don't want to copy the Soviet Union. We don't want to copy Cuba. We don't want to copy these countries. These countries made big mistakes, but we want to learn from their economic achievements to develop a form of socialism that will address our country. It will make life better in our country. So there you go. There you go. And I talk about all of this in the book, and I would really appreciate it if folks could go write a review for Amazon. Go write a review on Amazon of the book. There's a lot of good reviews up there already. But if you've read the book, go and write a review. It would be appreciated, because this book really tells you everything you need to know. Where is America going? It's not a short book, but it basically lays it all out there. You will understand the crisis, the need for anti-monopoly government, anti-monopoly coalition. You'll understand Bonapartism, the divide in the ruling class. You'll understand it all if you read this book. This book is what people need to understand. And, I've written it. It's rather ironic that I quote, especially in the opening part about economics. I quote Sam Marcy, the founder of the Workers' World Party. I quote Fred Goldstein, who was one of the leaders of the Workers' World Party, who just died like a month ago. I quote Nelson Peary, the leader of the League of Revolutionaries for a New America. I quote a lot of different Marxist thinkers. It's kind of ironic because it's like the left no longer talks the way they talk, and I'm on here, keeping their message alive, talking about the roots of the crisis. So there you go. We are not a political party. I'll answer this right now. We are not a political party. We are an educational organization, so we do not run candidates. We do not endorse candidates. We don't campaign for anybody. We are not involved in the U.S. elections in any way. We simply do educational work. There are probably people that will be inspired by our work, that will run for office, that will do such things, but we are not involved in the U.S. electoral process. We are not a political party. We are not a pre-party formation. We are an educational organization, and that we see ourselves as part of something bigger that will eventually come into existence. We hope that we, with our work, will inspire people to get involved in other ways, but we engage primarily and only really in educational work. So there we go. There we go. Do you believe in forces of evil as well as good? Satan, devil, evil spirits. And thank you for your contribution. The answer is yes. Yes, I do. I think that evil certainly exists in the world. I talk about city builders and the city building tendency and the vandal tendency. And I think that, evil certainly exists, and that there are forces of destruction and evil that exist in the world and drive people in a negative direction, drive people backward, drive people toward destruction. And I certainly think there are forces of evil in the world, and that evil takes on not just a psychological capacity, but sometimes a spiritual capacity. That when people do bad things, often it's because they have taken on a motivation, right? And I don't view these things purely in a psychological sense. I would argue that in some cases, there are forces that are beyond the material plane that can, to some degree or other, be involved. I'm not a pure dialectical materialist. I do believe in God. I do believe in good and evil, and I don't think everything can be explained simply in terms of materialism. I do think spiritual forces do exist. All right. This person said, darkness is the absence of light. Evil is the absence of good. Evil is not created. Yes, but I think evil is not simply an absence. I think that there is active evil. There's active darkness. There's active destruction. I think such things do exist. I'll just be honest with you. It's not simply the absence of good. There are actively destructive forces. All evil is not just passive. It's not just a negative, right? I think that there is active evil in this world, unfortunately. Under socialism, entrepreneurs can stop worrying about the regularly occurring financial collapses we are used to. Yes, under socialism, you have a state, a government that is actively looking to strengthen and empower the business community and create growth. So in a way, if you look at, for example, in China or in Nicaragua or in Vietnam, the private sector really benefits from the state subsidizing them, directing them, and causing them to continue to see growth and expansion, right? This notion that socialism is just the crushing of the business owner. That's past. That's in the past, right? That might have been how things were in the 20th century, but that's not how things are. 21st century socialism is really about the state working on behalf of the population to strengthen the economy and unleash growth. So you're absolutely right about that, Josiah. Absolutely right. All right. And the G7 summit in Hiroshima. Yeah, Joe Biden didn't apologize. Why will U.S. leaders not apologize for dropping the atomic bomb? Obama wouldn't apologize. No, I mean, how many years has it been? Why will U.S. leaders not apologize? It's a weird thing. The USA just won't apologize for dropping the atomic bomb. I do not understand it. I really do not understand it. Everybody knows it was not militarily necessary. Everyone knows it was a horrendous atrocity. Obviously, that doesn't negate the atrocities committed by Japan. Obviously, that doesn't negate the atrocities committed by the Nazis, but it was clearly not moral for the United States to drop the atomic bomb. You asked me this last night, and I don't know that play. I don't know my Shakespeare well enough to comment on Titus and Andronicus. Gannon, you asked me that before. I just don't know. I know Romeo and Juliet. I know Julius Caesar. I know Macbeth. I know Hamlet pretty well. I know the 12th Night. I know Midsummer Night's Dream. But that particular work of Shakespeare's, I am not familiar with Titus and Andronicus. I don't know it. I don't know it. I don't know everything. My knowledge of Shakespeare is somewhat limited. I talk about Hamlet a lot on these streams. I talk about, Macbeth sometimes. I talk about Julius Caesar a lot, and how Caesar's play kind of gets wrong, but kind of hints at who Julius Caesar was, but it kind of misses the point, right? I think Shakespeare was a really big influence on me. Absolutely. My uncle was a theater professor. My parents really pushed me to, would take me to see Shakespeare plays. They pushed that on me a lot. So, I think that Shakespeare has been a big influence on me. But I just don't know that particular work very well. I just don't. The prime directive in Star Trek, I know nothing about UFOs, man, other than, just how the role that they've played in American culture. And I don't know my Star Trek. What is the prime directive? I don't know what the prime directive in Star Trek is. I don't know my Star Trek well enough. I'm not a well enough Star Trek fan. I don't even know what the prime directive is. I know that's a thing in Star Trek, and I don't know how that's related to UFOs because I don't know enough about UFOs. I did a stream. I talked about UFOs in American culture. And I talked about different ways that the UFO theme in America, the notion that there are these things in the sky that might be aliens or whatever, that it's a big part of the American psyche, and it's changed over the years, right? There was leftists and hippies talking about UFOs, and there's conservative religious people. There's a gospel song you can listen to. You better pray to the Lord when you see those flying saucers. The different aspects of American culture, different wings of American society have kind of played into the UFO thing. But honestly, I really know nothing about UFOlogy, and you're asking me about a fictional Star Trek TV program and UFOs, and you lost me, man. I don't know what you're getting at. What are the materialistic necessities for CPI to become a party? CPI is not a party, right? A party would be a different organization, right? The way CPI is currently set up, we don't aspire to become a party. The way CPI is set up, we simply exist as an educational organization. A party in the United States would be a much bigger entity that would have trade unions involved with it. It would have people running for office. It would have a newspaper. It would have a lot of different things. But CPI exists. A party, a real revolutionary party, is like an orchestra. And if such a party existed, CPI would be one instrument in the orchestra. We'd be the trombones, we'd be the drums or the piano. We'd be one instrument in the orchestra. We'd be the educational wing of a party. We can't wait for a party to exist. We've got to do our work. And I believe already we have inspired people to do other work. There are people that have run for office out of inspiration from CPI. There are people that have gotten involved in labor union struggles because of CPI. We provide educational guidance, and other people may take our vision and inspiration and apply it in different ways, and we have no problem with that. That's what we want. We want people to be inspired by our work, but we are a community dedicated to socialist education. That is what we are. But I do thank you for the question. And, we can always use support. I mean, if you want to give a donation to CPI, we have links where you can make such a donation. Donations are very much appreciated. On the CPI website, we have a donate link, and, there are ways to donate to, CPI education project, which is incorporated in the state of Oregon. You can always do that. And Elizabeth Young, our president, would be happy to facilitate, help you to make such a contribution if you want to help us. But we have no aspiration to become a party. That is not what we exist in order to do. So there you go. All right, folks. Well, you asked me that on the other stream, and I answered that. Like, are we just repeating the previous streams? Like, what is this? And I explained to you what Bonapartism is. I explained to you. Okay. Go and watch the other stream where I answered that, Phil. I'm going to say good night for now. I'm going to put on the closing music. Talk to you all soon. All righty. Upsurge. in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.